Welcome to Detoxicity, a podcast that aims to reframe the narrative around masculinity by way of sharing experiences and stories. If you're looking for one of those alpha male podcasts that isn't centered around things like inclusivity and vulnerability, you are in the wrong place. Or maybe you're in the right place if you recognize that the Joe Rogans and the Red Pills of the world shouldn't be the norm. Anyway, I'm Mike Joseph. I host and produce this show, and I'm happy you're here. We are closing in on 5 years of this podcast, and I appreciate all the support I've received and would love to thank everyone who's been a guest now and in the future for allowing yourselves this space to share your story. If you'd like to know more about the guests, I suggest following them on social media. I usually mention where you can find them at the end of each episode. You can follow me on Instagram at DetoxPod. You can request a free coaching consultation from me at mike-joseph.com. And you can support Detoxicity by spreading the word to friends, by liking and commenting on whatever platform you're using to listen, or by becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com/detoxicitypod and subscribe for as little as $3 a month, and you will get early access to episodes. I'll even send you a cool DetoxPod fridge magnet. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this latest episode. So it's a little unusual for me to have a guest return to the show so quickly after their previous appearance, but with Damon Jacobs, I had to do this. Damon was on episode number 185, so less than 10 episodes ago, and we brought him back for this episode because he is so wise and so thoughtful, and our conversation was really what I needed in the moment that we had it. It felt like a therapy session with good reason. Damon Jacobs is a therapist. He lives and works out of Brooklyn, New York. He specializes primarily in working with queer and or polyamorous and or non-monogamous folks. We are at a stage right now where the political landscape in the United States is pretty bleak. And rightfully, a lot of us are freaking the fuck out. And one thing I really wanted to talk to Damon about was how to keep our heads up, how to stay strong, how to not lose sight of the good that's happening in the world, the good that's happening in our communities. And Damon does a really good job of explaining all of that. And, I hope that this conversation talks some folks off the ledge a little bit. It is a time of disconnection. This podcast is about connection. The best part of my life is connection. Damon is the person that fosters connection, whether through the work that he does via his practice or the work he does on his podcast Tub Talks, which I've been very fortunate to be a part of. Whether it's through his advocacy, political advocacy, HIV advocacy, queer advocacy. He has just devoted his life to service, to good, and it does my heart a lot of good to have him back on. So without further ado, folks, this is Damon Jacobs again.
Hi, Mike. It is so good to see you again. I'm so happy to be back on Detoxicity. This has been an amazing journey, and you've been so generous to share this with us for the past 5 years.
Thank you, Damon.
I love this show. I admire you so much, and I'm really grateful to be back.
Well, I'm grateful to you for coming back. So last time we had you on, I want to say it was probably close to a year ago. And we talked about a bunch of stuff. And I guess catch us up overarchingly on what's happened since we last had you on the show.
Well, what's happened was, I don't know if anyone noticed, but our American system is in major flux and decay. So last time we spoke, we were talking a lot about sexual health, which is still relevant, even more relevant today, about all the ways that we can be active and proactive with our sexual pleasure, connection, using biomedical innovations in PrEP, in HIV prevention, as well as STI prevention, all the science that's out there that allows us to connect without fear. At the same time now, in this year, we have seen an election go in a direction that I believe has really been about disconnection, about aggression, about dehumanization, and enacting policies that only serve a very specific percentage of the population and really dismiss and harm the majority of us. And
Agreed.
so it's interesting for me to be at sort of this crossroads where we have all these interesting scientific innovations in joy. And now we have a political framework that is trying to take us away from that.
Right. Absolutely. So I guess there's sort of two lanes to go when we have that framework. One is, how are you, Damon Jacobs, dealing with all of this? And B, not only as a practitioner, but just as a human, how are you dealing with this as someone who is so focused on connection and as a profession, as a vocation, connects with people, most of whom are under this cloud right now?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked because honestly, it has been a challenge. The night of the election, I was sitting with two of my very good friends in Brooklyn, and we were snuggling in and getting in and so ready to celebrate that night. And as the time went on and as the hours went on, everything sunk, our hearts sunk. And I remember at 1 in the morning, after a few glasses of wine, saying to my best friend Gall, I don't know how to be a therapist tomorrow. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to show up for this. And I said, all right, we had a little talk about that. And I was like, I've been a practitioner for almost 30 years. This is not entirely new in my life and in my lifetime to be in a state of somewhat chaos and disaster. It reminded me of a time when HIV and AIDS was still so completely devastating and ravishing the community that I serve and the community that I'm part of, the community I love, and how a very, very dear friend of mine named Chris Bender shared with me a book that really changed my life at this time. Chris himself had been living with AIDS, not HIV, AIDS, since 1987. And he had lost three husbands to AIDS and then lost a fourth husband to brain cancer. And I'm like, how can you
Jesus.
even be functioning? And he's like, well, I feel a lot of pain, but I don't feel suffering. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he pulled out a book from his bookshelf. This was in 2000. And he showed me this book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was a psychotherapist who lost everything during World War II. He was imprisoned in Auschwitz and came through that experience with a greater sense of compassion and meaning in his life, despite the fact that he lost his family. His family was murdered. He lost his freedom. He has continued to practice, and throughout his lifetime, he continued to practice a kind of psychotherapy and way of living that focuses on meaning and understanding and compassion through trauma and difficulty and hard times. So the night of the election, I went back to that. I'm like, I'm going back to Viktor Frankl basics here. Pain is an inevitable part of being human. If you're a human who loves humans,
Yes.
pain's part of the deal. Suffering is optional. Pain is what we feel because that's what we're meant to do. Suffering is the meaning we make out of the pain, such as, this is all going to be terrible. I am such a victim. The world is terrible. Everything is terrible. There's no reason to live. Everyone is going to be there's no reason to stick around here. I should be moving to, I don't know, God knows where, because I don't know where it's better. But all of this mental narrative that causes us to suffer. And when we practice a kind of suffering, when we practice a kind of despair and hopelessness, that is what extensively and cumulatively leads to deeper depression, anxiety, anger, substance abuse, suicidality, intimate partner violence, all the things that make us disconnected from one another and disconnected from the world. That part is optional. We do not have to buy into that. We don't have to go there. But that has to be a choice, Mike. We can't, by default, for most of us anyway, we have to practice these ideas on a regular basis. If our minds are always working, our minds are always working, right? Our brains are always working. You know this if you've ever learned how to tie your shoes or if you ever learned to drive a car. These are things that like required a lot of thought at first, and now you just do them. You probably don't
Right.
have to think a whole lot about it. That's because our brains are always thinking, but most of the time we're not thinking about what we're thinking about. In a lot of ways, that comes in handy because you don't want to have to think about it every time you drive a car or tie your shoe. But it reminds us our brains are always processing. And if we're not being intentional about that, if we're not being clear on that, then the default setting for a lot of us is going to be suffering, despair, depression, anxiety. And we're going to carry that into our lives. We're going to carry that into our relationships. We're going to carry that in our bodies in a way that's going to make these next 4 years much, much more hard than they have to be. It's going to cause a lot more suffering than pain. So, in answer to your question, I am toggling between this experience of witnessing what's happening today and feeling pain and respecting the role of pain in my life and in my body, because in this case, pain means that I'm a loving person. And if I'm a loving person in this world, I'm pretty horrified at this moment. But what I refuse to do actively is practice suffering around that hopelessness, helplessness, despair. I won't do that. I won't do that. And again, this is not unique to the Trump administration. This is something I've been practicing the majority of my life, or certainly since the year 2000, when Chris Bender started helping me understand these ideas that are presented in Man's Search for Meaning. These
Sure.
ideas are also outlined in Nelson Mandela's work and Tina Turner's work. A lot of people who have survived extreme adversity and violence have spoken about similar themes. That if we're going to change the world, it begins by changing our minds about the world.
I love that. And as I'm talking to you, I can only think of my own experience the last 90 days, 120 days, however long it's been, where immediately after the election, I just kind of threw my hands up and was like, I got nothing anymore. And I had a few weeks of that and kind of came out of it. And then after the inauguration, I sunk back into that same place. I felt the same way on January 21st that I felt on November 6th. And I do think that there has been a bit of, there's been a lot of things. There's been acceptance, there's been avoidance, there's been disconnection. I think me, like a lot of other people, are dealing with quite a few emotions right now, in addition to just like ridiculous levels of uncertainty. And while objectively, I totally understand the idea of mindfulness and, not suffering and processing the pain subjectively or in practice. It's in theory versus in practice thing, where it's like, okay, I understand that you have to do these things, but also, how do you do these things?
Well, I choose to do these things in a way where I start the day, usually I have to pee right when I wake up. But before I do anything else, I will sit on the floor and start to see if I can calibrate my brain and use tools, whether it's a meditative practice. I'm a big student of A Course in Miracles, which is a psychological spiritual course that uses, it's very wordy, and that kind of works for me as the cognitive way of making the theory tenable into practice, right? I am a mortal person. I am 53-year-old Damon. And yes, I have certain ideas about what I want to see. But that doesn't mean that all of those ideas are accurate. And that doesn't mean in the spiritual world that holds any weight whatsoever. I have like a filter, right, through which I see the world that's based and limited by the human body. So I also can operate and access a sort of a plane of existence where there is no separation, where you and I are all vessels of spiritual energy. That is a very loving and gracious light. Now, I know if I can, and it's a big if I can carry that into my day, I'm going to have a better day. And I'm going to be more effective as a therapist or a speaker or just as a friend or lover if I can carry that spiritual energy throughout the day. I'm not claiming to be a master at this by any stretch, but I'm saying this is how I sort of work out my brain. My brain is a muscle like any other part of my body. So if I want to be physically fit, if I want to have physical strength in a certain part of my body, that means I have to work it out through repetition and consistency. Same thing with our mental muscles. If we'd want this to be more than just an esoteric theory and actually a lived experience emotionally, that means repetition and consistency. And it can be in any way that makes sense for someone. It doesn't have to be this complicated thing. But it does, I think, especially now, need to be a regular, consistent practice. I am a loving vessel of spirit. That's a shortcut for me. I'm only here in this body today to be truly loving and to spread that message. I have very little say, clearly, in what anyone else does with that message or how anyone
Right.
else thinks or feels or votes because of that message.
Right.
But that's ultimately not going to be my spiritual business. I got to focus on what I can do and where I do have some control, which is my own mind and my own lived experience, and try to see where we can create space and connection around that so that people may also act in ways and vote in ways that also promote these ideas.
Have you found it easier or more difficult over the last few months to find connection or receive connection from others?
I find that there are some people, and I'm thinking like online, that are really invested in suffering right now, or appear to be, because I don't know, because I'm not really having these conversations with them. I'm just saying the way they're posting, the way they're publicly presenting themselves as a kind of sky is falling mentality. And I don't think that's a sustainable model for us to live a healthy life, nor to get through these next 4 years with a sense of power, purpose, and pleasure. I think we are going to get to the other side of this. And we want to make sure that we have some of our soul and heart and brain intact when we get there. Otherwise, it's sort of like driving with the emergency brake on. You know, if you ever drive a car with the emergency brake on, you're going to get to where you're going, but you're going to be in pretty bad shape by the time you get there. And I'm thinking about the next 4 years as a bit of how we're going to get to the other side in decent shape. So these conversations with certain folks that I know of or know publicly, they have been more fraught. And actually, to be honest with you, I don't really engage with that because people need to do what they need to do right now. And I respect that. Some people need to, we're a lot of us are in a bit of shock, and a lot of us are dealing with grief. So some people react to that by like really going full out on social media and da 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 every day, and other people are taking a few steps backward and saying, I need to withdraw, I need to distance, or I need to get away from the social media, or I just need to be insular right now. And that's all fine. That there's nothing wrong. I have no should about that. You know me, I'm like Mr. Shouldless. And I think if there's ever a time to be practicing shoulds with ourselves and our loved ones, it's now. For the people who are in my life, they know me and have known, and my clients know. We've been having these conversations for decades. This is like I said, this is a central part of who I am as a human being and the work I do. Viktor Frankl has taught us from World War II, a person's the last of human freedoms is the ability to control what we react and respond to. And this is a guy who was in, Auschwitz, who said this, that we can't control what most people say and do and think and vote. We only get a say from a mental health standpoint in how we react and respond. Now, I can tell you, Mike, I've been practicing almost 30 years now. I've been studying psychology, and part of studying psychology for me is also studying spirituality and anthropology, just understanding how human beings have survived and thrived in different areas throughout the ages. That I think the way American psychology is practiced is generally not very helpful. But I think there's a lot of tools and models that are helpful. And no matter what I study or what I look at, to me, it kind of boils down, no matter how much we complicate it, it kind of boils down to a very simple set of words. Most of mental health is how we deal with shit we can't control,
I
basically.
would agree with that.
So,
100%.
so once we start to work with that, that's where conversation can happen. That's where I want to have conversations with people. And some people don't want to have those conversations, which is totally fine. But when I get this chance with you and when I get this chance with people I'm connected to or my clients, yeah, we're going to have these conversations
Right.
a lot.
It's important to remember that. Speaking again for myself, I always want to say people, and then I'm like, not people, you have pretty extreme difficulty with not being able to control certain things. And I thought that as I got older that would sort of go away, but I think in moments of stress or moments of pressure, it actually amplifies, and it's gotten worse as I've gotten older. Um, and that letting go, again, it's another objective versus subjective thing. Let go is a mantra for me, but the actual letting go, physically, mentally letting go, spiritually letting go, is a lot of fucking work.
It is. It is. And I'm with you. It's like as I get older, I think, we often get set in our ways or we often get more strong in our beliefs or like I think that one of the things about getting older is the temptation to be comfortable. And that's great when that works that way, but for a lot of us right now in this political atmosphere, that's not available for us. There's
Right.
not going to be that comfortable state. So, it's humbling, right? We've lived this long. For some of us who've been fighting this hard for so many decades to see what's happening, it's humbling. It's really a kick in the pants. And I'm willing to be okay with that. Not I don't like it, but to know that difference, what you're saying is like today, what are the things that I have, if not control, where do I have some efficacy or impact? And what are the things I do not today have any impact or control over?
Sure.
The majority of what is happening in the world, and certainly what I see in the news, is stuff I have no immediate impact or control over. So I'm kind of sitting on the bench. I'm witnessing, I'm watching, and trying to have these conversations on the sidelines with you and with people, who I know who are going through hard times. But yeah, I don't let I had this fantasy in my 50s, in my 60s, that all this stuff that we've been working for and the generation before us was working for during the civil rights era and the Stonewall movement and the equal rights and women's movement. I thought all that stuff was going to accumulate in this trajectory of civil rights and peace and race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, that we were going to continue on a general trajectory of compassion and policy that reflects humanity. I thought we were gonna, stay on that path. And it is humbling and a real slap in the face to see us going in the exact opposite direction.
Yeah, it really is. I'm only a couple of years younger than you. And to think of the way I felt the world was when I was a preteen or a teenager, and to see what things are like, what things have progressed to, whether it's in terms of racial equity or gender equity or, sexual orientation acceptance, so all that stuff. Look, if you had told me right after 9/11 that we would end up with a black president, that gay marriage would be legal, any of those things, I'd have been like, you have rocks in your head. You have been visited by aliens. What you're saying has no feasible place in anyone's reality, right? Those things happened and they were great. They were great things. So I think some of the pain I'm feeling, some of the difficulty comes from the feeling that we went 20 steps or 10 steps forward and then just went 20 steps back.
I'm with you. And so I think that's a great reminder that none of us know what's ahead. As you said, the back where it seemed to be politically going back. And I remember when George W. Bush won the re-election in 2004 and had control of the House and the Senate, and how many people were panicking and despairing at that time. It was exactly 20 years ago that we
Right.
were going through all this when he was inaugurated at the beginning of 2005. So a lot of people I know were absolutely in great panic. And as you point out, look at what came through after that. We had Barack Obama twice. We had incredible gains in civil rights during that time. And not just the big things like marriage equality. People don't always realize, like, in my world, one of the hugest changes that Obama made was that he made it so that hospitals could not deny a same sex partner visitation rights. Now that's huge. That
Right.
may not be the thing people always remember, but in the therapy world, in the HIV world, in the AIDS world, that is a huge deal because what was happening before that is someone living or dying in the hospital that on a federal level, hospitals could deny their same-sex partner visitation rights.
Right.
And
Right.
President
I
Barack
remember
Obama
that.
changed that. So that was like, okay, so we thought that was going, but that did come from the George W. Bush years that were at the time seemingly very conservative and backward.
Right. Right.
So maybe we don't know. Maybe you don't know. Maybe I don't know. Maybe none of us know.
I mean, I don't think any one of us knows. Fear is anticipatory, right? Nobody knows what's going to happen. I think certainly everybody's aware of what can happen, and people are bracing for the worst case and have braced for the worst case scenario. But no one knows what is actually going to happen. And the uncertainty, I mean, look, uncertainty is a huge part stressed, right? I mean, people. When I stress out about my job, it's because I don't know whether I'm going to get fired tomorrow. You know, when people stress out about their relationships, it's because they don't know if their partner's going to leave them tomorrow
Yeah,
or something's going to happen to them or whatever. So a lot of that is just preparatory or anticipatory stress.
right. Now, there is the level that I think it is valuable for us to work as humans on, because there's always going to be uncertainties in life. And at the same time, we can also pivot and say, so what is certain then? What is certain in a world that's uncertain? Okay, well, I think what's certain is that no matter who comes in and out of my life, I know who I am. I'm a vessel of spirit. I'm going to say God because that's the word I've used, but some people don't like that word. But
That's
I'm a
fine.
vessel of God in the human body. Now that's been true every day of my 53 years. No matter who has hated me or tried to harm me, or who has loved me or tried to celebrate me, or who has died or who has lived, I'm still this God, this vessel of spirit in a human body. That's true. That's going to be true as long as I'm in this human body. And after that, it might be a different body. I don't know. That's really none of my business. But that's what I know. I don't know where I'm always going to have income. I don't always know who is going to be choosing to be in and out of my life. I do know who I am. And that has been a comfort of getting older, is to be able to practice that more often. Politically, what you're describing, that uncertainty, that ambivalence, I think it's a mental health form of terrorism that they are consciously practicing. They want us to be cowering in fear, even when there's nothing at the immediate moment
To
going
be
on.
scared of, right?
I think there's nothing more than the MAGA base would like is to have people cowering in the corner, crying and fearing about tomorrow, because that makes their job easier for them. They want us to be living in a persistent place of confusion and fear. So let's not give them that victory. Let's not live there all the time. Let's discern what is painful from what is suffering. Most of stress, as you pointed out, is anticipatory, is worrying. And if we can practice changing that, then we are actually much better equipped to deal with the actual shit that does happen. Then we're much more centered and able, our central nervous system is able to handle and make clearer decisions when there really is a problem to solve, or stuff we got to figure out.
I don't think I asked this the first time we spoke, but where does your spirituality come from?
Ooh, so thank you for asking that.
I'm curious because I grew up Christian
Yeah.
and I have been intermittently at odds with the idea of religion specifically.
Yeah.
The idea of God being a long-haired white guy with a beard. And I don't know if I've ever really been at odds with the idea of God being something that exists in each of us,
Mhm.
that we have the ability to replicate or practice. So there's always sort of been a weird or just sort of a thoughtful divide in my spirituality. But I've noticed over the past couple of months, the idea of God is starting to sort of almost come back to me to the point where I'm like, maybe I should stop into a church. You
Mhm.
know, I've been having these internal struggles, and you've already said some very eloquent things about spirituality, and I just kind of wonder where that came from and what that looks like for you.
Yeah. So for me, spirituality is about an active relationship I have with higher power or God or higher power or spirit or share, whatever we want to call it. You know, it's like whatever it is that we feel greater than, an energy, not an entity, but an energy that is greater than. So I firmly believe, and I don't just think this intellectually, I firmly have the experience of you and I and all humans being vessels of God energy, that you have a light, that if we seek and we see each other with that light, that we affirm that beautiful spirit in each other and in ourselves. And again, there really is no separation. There looks like we're separation because of these things called bodies. But in essence, in our purest form, there is no separation. You and I are the exact same energy. We're just practicing that differently in these different vessels. Now, religion to me is different from that, because religion to me is how you organize and control people. To me, religion operates on the level of conformity and should.
Hmm.
It's trying to tell people how they should be in connection with higher power or God, how they should practice the rituals they should be participating in. And again, for people, when that's an authentic thing, that's great. But when you start to create conformity and groups and inner and outer echelons and stigma and shame around that, then you really are not doing the work.
Mm.
That's religion. That's how I perceive religion. Spirituality is a much more individual, or people can do it in a connected way, but it's really not contingent on being part of an organization or going to a particular place. God exists everywhere. God's in my office. God's with me when I'm being fucked in the back of the club. God's with me if I go to church. I may be at church at the rooftop at the Eagle. It's like God doesn't really care about any of that stuff. God doesn't know boundaries. God just like, all right, I'm with you. When you choose to be aligned with me, I'm right here. It's not Santa Claus. It's not a judge. It's not an entity that's judging whether you're naughty or nice. It is a benevolent, loving energy that is in all of us. And when we're tapped into that, like when we're connected to the 5G, the 5 God Wi Fi connection, then we're able to operate in this world from a place of clarity, from a place of love, from a place of respect, from a place of recognizing light in each other, even if and when we disagree with each other, that there's still light and beauty and vitality in you, in us. And if we were all to think about that, we may continue, or we might go back to seeing a world that reflects more of those values in a consistent way.
I love that. And I really am focusing in on what you said about not needing to be in a particular place at a particular time on a particular day
Mhm.
to experience God. Because, look, I have no tangible experience or knowledge of what a religious experience should feel like. But the closest, the experiences that I've had when I have felt close to like a spiritual power or a higher power have often been first time I saw Stevie Wonder in concert and was sitting there and he was singing and everybody just the energy just felt so warm and everybody was kind of tapped in. That was a religious experience. Being in a club in my 20s playing fantastic music and everybody just letting themselves go on a dance floor. That is a religious experience to me. Any sort of intentional and meaningful and honest fellowship, whether it's a house party or any sort of social event, like that's a religious experience for me or a spiritual experience. And I have not been in very many churches in my adult life, but certainly when I went to them fairly regularly as a child, I didn't feel that same spiritual connection, that connection to life, to a higher power than I have in those other moments, which most quote unquote religious people would say has nothing to do with spirituality at all.
Right. I mean, I think those are transcendent, right? They remind us of a greater energy in us.
You know,
That
it's like
energy, yeah.
it's like when I read about like the Paradise Garage
Mhm.
and you talk to people who were able to go on a night when it was really like jumping and they were there just for the music and at 3 o'clock in the morning when the music's thumping and you're sweaty and whatever's in the air is in the air and you might be a little altered. That is sort of where the money is for me in terms of feeling one with the world. That I'm envious of that feeling almost.
Yes. And I'd say that's those experiences they remind us that we are one with the world. They really give us that palpable moment of reminding us who we truly our true essence is, that we are one with the world. We are just temporarily doing time in these vessels called bodies that make us look like we're different, that make us look like we're separate.
Right.
But when we get those moments, even if it's just a few seconds, where we are reminded we are one, that we are just beautiful spiritual light in human bodies, it's euphoric. It's
Ah,
wonderful.
euphoria. That's such a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Now,
that's a
my
word.
thing is, we don't necessarily have to compartmentalize that into these unique experiences at Paradise Garage. I never went there, but my friend Krishna Stone did, and she has so many. She says the
Yeah, I
same
don't.
thing.
I think we're a little too young for that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wasn't able to get in. But she describes exactly what you described. That transcendence, that through the music, through the dance, was that reminder of the oneness of spirit that transcends the bodies. What if we could consciously, intentionally access that on a more regular, consistent basis? Maybe not as euphorically, but just kind of a regular part of our routine and day.
How
What
do
that
we
might be like.
how do we do that?
So for me, the practice is through a psychological spiritual course I mentioned called A Course in Miracles. What I like about it is very much representative of a lot of spiritual values, but it also really represents a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. Meaning, the majority of our emotional human experience is going to be determined by what we're thinking, what we're believing, what we are perceiving. That so if we want to change the way we feel, if we want to change this experience that we're having here on earth, first place we want to go to is not Facebook or X or Blue Sky. The first place we want to go to is the brain, the mind, the powerful set of neurons that inform most of our human experience, and then practice that. So A Course in Miracles is really about channeling and accessing the fact that only love is real. Everything else in the human world is shit that we made up.
Mm,
But in our truest essence, like you described, that people describe from Paradise Garage, in that truest essence, only love is real. And then we operate from that. Now, meanwhile, we're still on Earth, we're still in the world, we still got to deal with shit, we still got to work, we still got to, eat. We still need safety and food and, all that stuff. So we are in the world, but we don't always have to be of the world. We can do both at the same time. That's where I see the difference between politics for me and spirituality at this moment. I'm in the world, yes, and I'm going to keep fighting, yes, and I'm going to keep standing up and speaking for the things I believe in and the values that I hold sacred. Yes, absolutely. I'm in the world operating on that level. And I am also regularly visiting and accessing not being of the world, right? When we go a little bit above that, that's where we come back and we return to that loving space of being one. But it's not going to happen incidentally or accidentally. It can only happen intentionally for most
intentionally.
of us. We're not going to
Right.
just get there by ourselves. We're not going to just do it as we're walking down the street. For most of us, that's going to have to be an experience. If we're going to have it at all, it has to be something we practice intentionally. For me, Course in Miracles and the text and the 365 lessons that go along with that, the 365 lessons are like a regular reps for the brain. Like you go to a gym and you do all these reps to keep your body in fit. 365 lessons of the Course of Miracles are sort of these little reps that give your brain little workouts to remind yourself of who you really are and who we really are. And that the fact that only love is real. We can return to love. We can return to God. We can return to spirit anytime and experience the peace. If not the euphoria, then at least the peace and the bliss that goes along with that, while we are also doing time on planet Earth and fighting the good fight.
Let's talk about, I guess community is a good way to say this. I Obviously there are a lot of differences, superficial differences that are separating us, whether they be religious differences, gender differences, sexuality differences, racial or ethnic differences, all financial status differences, all of that stuff. And one thing that these last few months is, I don't know if you want to call it tribalism. I'm not smart enough to be able to define it properly, but this separation that I've never really practiced in my community, in my personal intentional community. There are black people, white people, gay people, straight people, bi people, cis people, queer people, men, women, and it's not like five of everybody. Some groups are represented more than others, but I have a lot of black friends who only have black friends. I have a lot of gay friends who only have gay friends.
Mhm.
I have a lot of, I mean, I can't say I have a lot of white friends who only have white friends, because if I'm their friend, that means they don't just have white friends. But I'm sure there are tons of white people out there. I mean, I know there are tons of white people out there who only have white friends.
Yeah.
Straight people who don't hang out with acknowledged queer people. I mean, I think every straight person has at least one queer friend. They just don't know that that friend is queer. But the point that I'm trying to make is, it feels like, and I think social media has been a part of this as well, we've sort of all put ourselves in these little boxes and don't really feel bothered to push out of the boxes at all. You know, I was speaking maybe a year and a half or so ago to a trans man for the podcast, and he said that he actually liked having conversations with people who were not, who had issues with him being trans, because if you have that conversation respectfully, the needle moves. And the episode that's going to go live before yours is with this guy in Utah who is not a bigot, otherwise he wouldn't be on my show, but is also very straight, Mormon background, white guy. And I think that in order to kind of jump this next hurdle, we need to collectively call in as opposed to call out. How do we do that?
Well, I love that idea of calling in versus calling out. Because if we're ever going to move the needle in anyone or help them expand their consciousness or come from a place of more empathy, it happens typically when they feel respected, when their central nervous system is not in defense mode. Most people don't open their minds or hearts when they feel shoulded or condemned or judged or yelled at. So those conversations that you're describing, I think, are absolutely critical to changing and helping people understand and change their minds and hearts. At the same time, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it kind of takes a lot of work.
It
That's a
does.
lot of emotional labor to do that.
It does. And I say that from a place of someone who, you know, I have a fair amount of white friends. I also have a fair amount of straight friends. But I feel like the friends that I have already done some of the work. So it's not like I'm the first Black person that's coming into their lives, or I'm the first queer person that's come into their lives. They're, and I mean, this is New York City. So I feel like even the more bigoted people in New York City have some experience outside their comfort zone, just because New York City is just this complete mix of everything. If I lived in Ohio, or if I lived in Indiana, or if I lived in Utah, it would be a different story, and I might not be as comfortable stepping out of the people who have some base level idea of the experience that I've gone through. But I think living in a place like this, it's a bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's something to be said for, as you point out, associating and socializing in your spare time with people who you feel safe with, whatever that means to you. And I can't tell anybody what that is. And I certainly won't tell anybody what that should be, because I don't believe in should.
Right.
You know, I think there's a lot of folks right now who are feeling directly impacted and assaulted in the macro world by our current political system. And one of the ways they might get through this without the emergency brake on is by socializing and feeling connection with people in the community that are in a similar place, people with whom you share a racial identity, gender identity, sexual orientation. And so if that is helpful, then yes, I encourage people to just be with that and seek that out. And if it feels like you can, see if there's room, if there's energy around creating connection, friendship with people who might see it differently. Or as you said, maybe interview someone, or if you can, talk to a Trumper or a MAGA person who, but that takes a lot of mental energy and work.
Right.
And, for some people, that's like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to step up and I absolutely want to do that. Other people are like, no, no, no. I don't want to put myself in a position. I don't want to be vulnerable in that way to this person. Those are perfectly legitimate positions to be in. Protect your space, protect your heart, protect your energy.
Yeah.
I got no beef with that. I think it's like just kind of up to each of us to say where we're at and what we want to do. I'm a fairly privileged white guy, and I want to. Well, I can't do it right now. I really, really cannot have a conversation with a MAGA person right now, but I know I will. I'm not there yet. And when the time comes, I want to be available for that again. one of the things I did before the election was go to Luzerne County,
I
Pennsylvania.
was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. And really having these conversations with Trump supporters for 9 days, over 500 people, to talk about these things, because that's where I was at. I was really able to do that before the election and try to see if there's energy around opening up their hearts and minds to what Kamala Harris was speaking about and what the policies that she was proposing. And sometimes there was space and sometimes there wasn't. I am not in that space today, Mike. I cannot do it today. And I know it. And I'm not ashamed of that. I'm like, okay, that takes a lot of energy. I'm not in this space, but I will be. So for now, I'm staying closer to New York City, closer to the friends and the created family and that I love, that I feel safe with, and just sort of replenishing my energy tank. And, I just saw my biological family and I love them in Los Angeles and just kind of I'm really in a place of exquisite self care right now. But when the time is right, in the way that makes sense to me, I'm going to do this again and canvas again or go out there again, try to engage in those conversations again. I think whatever you do, whatever anyone needs to do to feel safe, to feel okay, to get through this rough time is totally, that's what you need to do. Your instinct is there to guide you for this reason.
That's really interesting. I was going to bring up you doing the canvassing in this conversation. You brought it up first. I don't think I'd have been able to do that then. I certainly don't think I'd be able to do it now. I have a relative who is an open Trumper, which is, a year ago, I'd say that and I'd be like, it's crazy to me to think that. Now, seeing how Black folks and Latino folks have swung in that direction almost, it makes more sense to me. I still hate it. I just don't think it's as unique or as strange, which is, I guess, kind of sad. But this person, I grew up with this person, and I don't ever want to see this person again. So I have a lot of admiration for you and anybody who who put themselves in that kind of situation and did so willfully and without sacrificing anything about who you were. Like, you're not the person who goes home to their MAGA relatives and is like, oh, we're not going to talk about politics at all, which I think is, sorry for judging people, I think that's bullshit. But you were out there and you were being your authentic self and meeting these people where they were being presumably their authentic selves, and had the spoons, you had the space for it. Whereas, again, then I didn't have the space for it. Now I very much don't have the space for it. With all that said, I do think that the people that do have this space for it, and this is where allyship comes in, and I'm going to talk about allyship until I'm blue in the fucking face, but it is really important for people who have the space to do that. And more importantly, people who have the privilege to have these conversations. Straight dudes talking to straight dudes, white women talking to white women, all this kind of stuff. If you have the space and the privilege to move the needle, do everything within that space to move the needle.
Yes, I agree. And remember, I do that work, but I'm not hanging out with these people. I'm not socializing with these people. I'm not like having a beer with these people. I'm knocking on their doors and consciously, intentionally having conversations with them that I hope might move the needle. When I am here or in my life and wanting to socialize in ways that feel safe, it's not with Trump voters.
Sure. I mean, also,
But
we're in New York City, so we're in probably one of the 5 places in this country where the concentration of non-Trumpers to Trumpers is huge.
Right. But it does take a village. And canvassing, talking with people with differences, it's just something that I do have the privilege to do. As a white male, I do feel safer doing that. And I'm willing to do it. And I also grew up in a very political family, a left-leaning political family. My father was a politician in Culver City growing up. So I canvassed with him as a child. Like, that's kind of in my blood. I feel very comfortable doing that. I like doing that, actually. That's fun in a way. But that's not a good fit for everybody. For some people, it's making phone calls. For some people, it's writing letters. For some people, it's making sure everybody in their church is registered to vote. It's making sure that everybody has a ride to vote, which is what Souls to the Polls does. Souls
Right.
to the Polls is a spiritual group that literally gives people rides to the polls on election day. We all have a role to play in advancing humanity. And right now, we're at this moment where there is a lot of chances and a lot of opportunities for us to consider ways to advance humanity and help each other ascend. That to me is, Mike, is really what this is about. Bottom line is like how we practice using these human bodies, these temporary vessels, to join and ascend. When we talk about compersion in the polyamory community, we talk about this idea of having joy in someone else's joy, even if you're not directly the source of it, right? So if I have a partner and he has an emotional sexual experience with somebody else that brings him a lot of joy, that compersion means I find a way to join with him and feel joy for him, even if I wasn't there for it, right? Well, that to me, if we broaden that definition a little bit, is really what we're talking about here when we talk about political activism, is this notion that when one of us ascends, we all ascend. That it is good for our humanity, again, because we're really not separate. We only have the bodies that make us look separate. We're all the same energy. So when you ascend, I ascend. When people we love are feeling well, we all feel better because we are joined. That to me is what this fight remains to be about. So for anyone who's on board with this and anyone who wants to advance these ideas and try to see this reflected in our local federal politics, there are so many ways to do that. Some of which are talking to the Trump voters or the independent voters directly. Some of which are just working within your own network to make sure people understand the issues at stake, to understand what they're voting for and what the consequences are, and making sure that they have access to safe voting in their local area. There's a role for everybody here.
Right. Right. No, you're absolutely right. Um, what are some actionable things that we can do to center joy? Particularly since 2020, there's been a lot of conversation about centering joy, focusing on joy, prioritizing joy. And in times like these, sometimes it's hard to remember that there are, even in the worst of times, things to be joyful about or joyful experiences that you can have.
Yeah.
So, what are some actionable ways that you would suggest to just prioritize or center or experience joy?
Yeah. To me, there's a really great shortcut for that. It's called gratitude. That you seek out gratitude every day, even if it's just for the little. If you woke up today, that means you have something to be grateful for. I start the day during that period I told you about with gratitude. Even if I'm grumpy, even if I'm angry, even if I'm pissed off about something happening in the world, I seek desperately, even if it's repetitive. What am I grateful for? Well, if I woke up today, that means I got a lot of things going well in my life. If I have 5 fingers and toes, that means I've got a lot of things going well. If I have clean water to drink and food to eat, that means things are going really well. So I start with the basics. I start with gratitude. That helps me to be centered in joy. I remind myself, because I'm stubborn and I'm a Taurus, it's like, look, if I wake up and I practice despair and anger and helplessness all day long and walk through New York City carrying that everywhere I go, wouldn't that be golden for the MAGA party? Isn't that what they want us to be doing? Isn't that the kind of energy they want us to practice with each other right now? Despair, hopelessness, victimhood, and disconnection. That seems to me to be their MO. I'm not going to give them that satisfaction. If nothing else, I'm going to practice joy just to say a fuck you to them, because they don't want me to be joyful. They don't want you to be joyful. They don't want us to be feeling okay at certain times. So we can find that place of feeling joy. What is that going to look like? It's going to be different for everybody on any given day. The things that give me joy: my work, my bathtub, my friendships, my sexual partners. Today is warmer in New York City. I'm not freezing my ass off. I'm not wearing 5 layers of clothes. That brings me joy. Can I tell you, Mike? People know this or don't know that. I love soap operas. I've always loved soap operas. My
You
entire
didn't? I don't think. I think we talked about that a little last time.
Yeah. And the very first American soap opera, the first network television soap opera in 25 and a half years, is premiering Monday, February 24th on CBS. It's called Beyond the Gates. And it is not only the first soap opera in 26 years, it is the first Black soap opera ever, the first soap opera to ever feature a Black producer, a Black director, a Black writer, and primarily Black actors. And
Wow.
so that is occurring on February 24th. It's going to be a 1-hour show available on CBS and Paramount Plus. I am so joyful about that. I cannot even tell you. That is what's giving me such a charge, because that is amazing. Like, again, it may sound silly, but I love soap operas and I've always loved the history. But pretty much every soap opera that's ever been on the air has been centered on white experience, white families, and white writers and producers behind the scenes. This is a radically different show that CBS and the NAACP is producing. So let's celebrate that. Like, to
Wow.
me, that's a source of joy. I like that. I'm grateful for that. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how that all unfolds. So these are the things that give me a sense of joy. I love my parents. They're in their 80s. They're in Los Angeles. I just went to visit them. That I flew on a plane. It didn't fall out of the sky. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I have my health. I'm grateful I have my sexual partners. I'm grateful I have my primary partner. I'm grateful I live in New York, where we have the best pizza in the world. I mean, these are the things that are giving me joy right now.
I love that. I was actually just looking at Damon's website, and I discovered that one of his specialties, or the first thing that's listed now, is that he can help you explore and change issues related to finding your power during the Trump administration. So check him out, y'all. Thank you, Damon, for doing the show a second time. Let's have you back a third time. I think you have a lot of insight and warmth and knowledge to bring to the world, and I am so glad that you're here doing it. You can find him at damonljacobs.com. His series is called Tub Talks. You can find it on YouTube by either typing his name in, Damon Jacobs, or just typing in Tub Talks. It should be pretty easy to find. He is on the gram, and you can find him there at Damon L. Jacobs, and I believe he is also on Blue Sky. I am not advertising any other social media platforms at the moment, but I believe Damon L. Jacobs is his screen name or nom de plume or whatever for everything that he does. So again, Damon, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for listening. Take care of each other, please. Thank you for listening to Detoxicity. I hope you found this particular episode interesting. And if you are new, I hope you go back and listen to all of the older episodes. Once again, my name is Mike Joseph. I am the host and producer of this show. And there are a lot of things that you can do to continue to support our mission, continue to support this podcast. Follow me on social media. I am on Instagram, Twitter, and I'm on TikTok as DetoxPod Guy. You can also send me an email if you'd like. I'm at detoxpod@gmail.com. I am always on the hunt for people with interesting, inspirational, and powerful stories. So if you know somebody who fits that bill, or if you yourself fit that bill, please don't hesitate to drop me a line via email or via social media. Please make sure you subscribe on your podcast platform that you're listening to this on. Rate, comment, help a brother out, help us move up in the rankings. Follow me on social media. Like I said, follow our Patreon, or subscribe to my Patreon, actually. Patreon.com/detoxicitypod. You get access to exclusive episodes. You get episodes a little earlier than the general public. You get a cool ass sticker, lots of stuff. Once again, patreon.com/detoxicitypod. Quick shout out to Calvin Williams for providing the music and doing his magic on the logo, which was originally designed by Jacob Block. I thank you all for listening. I wish you all the best. Please take care of each other. Till next time, peace.